Far out at the edge of known space, where the stars grew thin and the dark grew thick, the Cauldronic Assembly held its yearly meeting. This was not a friendly meeting. It was a meeting of power, of pride, and of old grudges. 12 species sat around the table, each one strong in its own way, each one watching the others for weakness. Humanity had a seat at that table too. It was a small seat, at the end, often ignored. Humans had only joined the wider galaxy a few decades ago, and to most of the older species, they were still children. Loud children, strange children, children who smiled too much and threatened too little. But there was a rumor about humans that made some of the older species uneasy. It was not a rumor about weapons or fleets or numbers. It was a rumor about their ships. Human ships were small, absurdly small. While the Vondrak Empire built battleships the size of small moons, and the Threll Combine floated war arcs that blotted out suns, human ships looked like toys beside them. A human battleship might be barely larger than a Threll shuttle. A human carrier could fit inside the cargo bay of a Vondrak transport. And yet, no one who had fought humans in the last 20 years wanted to fight them again. This confused the galaxy. Big ships won wars. Everyone knew this. More mass meant more armor, more weapons, more crew, more everything. It was simple math. So why did the humans, with their tiny ships, keep winning? Some species had theories. The Threll believed humans used trickery, hiding real strength behind sensor illusions. The Vondrak believed humans were simply lucky, and luck always ran out eventually. The quiet, insect-like Farai, who rarely spoke at the assembly, believed something else entirely. But the Farai never explained what they believed, and no one asked twice, because talking to the Farai for too long gave most species a headache. At the center of this assembly meeting sat Ambassador Voss Kelrath of the Vondrak Empire. He was tall, gray-skinned, with 4 eyes arranged around his head so he could see every side of a room at once. He did not like humans. He did not like their smiling faces, or their casual words, or the way their delegate, a middle-aged woman named Diane Okafor, leaned back in her chair, as if this assembly were a coffee shop and not the seat of galactic power. Voss Kelrath had lost a cousin in a border skirmish with a human patrol ship 3 years ago. The human ship had been small, barely 600 meters long, according to the reports. The Vondrak cruiser that engaged it had been over 2 kilometers long, armed with plasma lances that could crack a planet's crust. And the human ship had won. Kelrath had read the report 100 times. He still did not understand it. Today, the assembly was discussing a new matter, a disputed system called Praxis Vale, rich in rare minerals, sitting exactly between Vondrak territory and human territory. Both sides claimed it. Neither side wanted to give it up. The system belongs to the Vondrak Empire by right of proximity, Kelrath said, his 4 eyes fixed on Diane Okafor. Human presence there is an act of provocation. Funny, Diane said, sipping something from a metal cup. We were there first. Our survey team mapped it 11 years ago. You only noticed it existed after we built a mining outpost. Laughter rippled through part of the chamber. Not mocking laughter, just the sound of species who found human directness entertaining. Kelrath did not find it entertaining. This is a matter that should be settled with strength, Kelrath said, not with words. Diane's smile did not move, but something in her eyes sharpened. Are you challenging us, Ambassador? The chamber went quiet. A challenge in the assembly was old law, rarely used but never removed. Any 2-member species in dispute over territory could settle it through a formal, limited combat trial. 1 ship from each side, in open space, watched by neutral observers, with the loser required to withdraw their claim. It was meant to prevent full wars. It was meant to be fair. Kelrath had planned this moment for weeks. He had studied every human engagement report he could find. He had noticed a pattern that gave him confidence. The humans always seemed to send their larger, more heavily crewed ships to real battles. Their small ships, the ones with strange nicknames, the ones humans seemed almost fond of, were rarely sent into serious combat. Kelrath guessed this meant something simple. Those small ships were not actually dangerous. They were decoys, or scouts, or ships too weak to matter. The wins attached to them, he believed, were flukes, lucky escapes, or exaggerated stories. So Kelrath made his demand. I challenge Earth to a trial of strength over Praxis Vale, he said. 1 ship each. And Ambassador Okafor, I choose the terms. Humanity must send its smallest battleship, the smallest one in your entire fleet registry. A murmur ran through the chamber. This was an unusual demand, almost insulting. Deliberately asking for the weakest possible opponent was seen among the older species as both clever and a little cowardly. But it was within the old law. Kelrath was allowed to set the terms, as long as they were not physically impossible. Diane Okafor did not flinch. She did not even blink. She set down her metal cup, folded her hands together, and said, "All right." Kelrath's 4 eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious of how easily she agreed. "You accept the terms?" he asked. "I accept the terms," Diane said. "Smallest battleship in the registry. You'll have your ship in 6 days, at the coordinates the assembly sets. I hope you're ready, Ambassador." "It is you who should hope to be ready," Kelrath said. Diane just smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. Far away, on a human world called New Bristol, a message arrived at a small naval command station orbiting the planet. The station was not glamorous. It handled routine patrols, minor repairs, and paperwork that nobody enjoyed. Its commanding officer, a woman named Captain Reina Solano, was reading the message twice, just to make sure she understood it correctly. "They want the smallest ship in the registry," she said aloud, mostly to herself. Her second in command, a young lieutenant named Marcus Webb, leaned over her shoulder to read the screen. "That's a weirdly specific request. Smallest ship, not weakest, not oldest, smallest." "They think small means weak," Reina said. She almost laughed, but she stopped herself, because she understood exactly why the Vondrak ambassador had made that mistake. Most of the galaxy made that mistake. Humans had never gone out of their way to correct it. "So, who do we send?" Marcus asked. Reina pulled up the fleet registry. She filtered by hull length. The list sorted itself. Largest at the top, smallest at the bottom. She scrolled all the way down. There was only one ship listed at the very bottom, under the tag, Special Registry, Deep Compression Class. Its official designation was HMS Wren. Its hull length was listed as 140 meters. For comparison, a standard Vondrak cruiser was over 2,000 meters long. The Wren was, by hull measurement, over 14 times smaller. Marcus read the name and frowned. "The Wren? Isn't that Halverson's ship?" "It is," Reina said. "She's out near the Kessler Drift right now, isn't she? On the long patrol?" "She is." Marcus rubbed his forehead. "Captain, with respect, the Wren is a compression-class experimental hull. It's barely 5 years out of the design labs. Do we really want to send her into a formal assembly combat trial? This isn't some border skirmish. There will be observers, cameras. Every species in the assembly will be watching." Reina looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she smiled, the same kind of small, quiet smile that Diane Okafor had shown in the assembly chamber a few hours earlier, though neither woman knew the other had made that exact expression. "That," Reina said, "is exactly why we're sending her." She opened a direct channel and sent a priority message out toward the Kessler Drift, addressed to Commander Alexis Halverson, captain of the HMS Wren. 3 light-years away, in the quiet dark near the Kessler Drift, the HMS Wren moved slowly through a field of ice and rock, its sensors sweeping the debris for anything unusual. From the outside, it looked exactly like its file said, small, sleek, barely more than a large shuttle with weapons mounted on the hull. Its gray armor plates were scuffed from small impacts. It did not look like a battleship. It did not even look particularly dangerous. Inside, in a bridge no bigger than a modest living room, Commander Alexis Halverson sat in her chair, boots up on the edge of the console, reading a paperback novel on a cracked data slate. She was in her late 30s, with short dark hair and a scar above one eyebrow that she never explained to anyone who asked. Her crew, 22 people total, a tiny number for a ship that the assembly registry still classified as a battleship, moved quietly around her, running routine diagnostics. A soft chime interrupted her reading. Priority channel. She set down the data slate and opened the message. She read it once. Then she read it again, slower. Her helmsman, a quiet man named Chief Petty Officer Idris Osei, noticed the look on her face. "Something wrong, Commander?" Alexis didn't answer right away. She was smiling. Not a happy smile, not exactly. but the kind of smile a person gets when something long expected finally arrives. "Chief," she said, "set a course back to New Bristol. Best possible speed." "Yes, ma'am. Reason?" Alexis stood up from her chair, tucking the data slate under her arm. "We've been challenged," she said. "The Vondrak Empire wants to test humanity's smallest battleship." A few crew members exchanged glances. One of the younger officers, a gunnery specialist barely 2 years out of the academy, spoke up nervously. "Commander, are we ready for something like that? I mean, the Wren is small. Everyone knows that. What if they—" Alexis cut him off, not unkindly. "Ensign Park, do you know why they call us the smallest battleship in the fleet?" "Because we're small?" he said, a little unsure. "Because our hull is small," Alexis corrected. "That's a very different thing." She walked toward the center of the bridge, where a holographic display could project a full schematic of the ship. She activated it with a tap, and the small, simple outline of the Wren appeared, floating above the console. 140 meters of gray hull. "They measured the outside," Alexis said quietly, looking at the little glowing ship. "They never bothered to ask what's on the inside." She turned to her crew, and though her voice was calm, there was something steady and certain underneath it, the voice of someone who had trained for this exact moment for a long time, without knowing when it would finally come. "6 days, she said. "We have 6 days to get to New Bristol, receive final briefing, and get to the trial coordinates. I want every system checked twice. I want the crew rested. And I want everyone to remember something very simple." She looked around at the 22 faces watching her. "They're not wrong that we're small," Alexis said. "They're wrong about what that means." Back on New Bristol, in a much larger and much more secretive facility, buried beneath the planet's northern mountains, a very different kind of meeting was happening. This was not the assembly. This was Fleet Command's Special Design Division, the group of engineers and scientists responsible for building ships like the Wren. Vice Admiral Thomas Reyes stood at the head of a long table, looking at a group of a dozen senior engineers. On the wall behind him, a display showed the full technical specifications of the Wren. Specifications that existed nowhere in the Assembly's public registry. Specifications that even most human naval officers never saw. "They asked for the smallest ship," Reyes said. "By hull length. That's the exact wording in the challenge terms, confirmed by the Assembly's neutral observers." An engineer near the front, a woman named Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had led the design team for the Wren's internal systems for 6 years. "Hull length," she repeated. "Not mass, not volume, not power output. Hull length." "Correct," Reyes said. "Then they've made a mistake they're going to regret," Priya said. Reyes nodded slowly and looked back at the schematic on the wall. A schematic that, if the Vondrak Empire had ever seen it, might have made Ambassador Kelrath reconsider his challenge entirely. But the Vondrak had not seen it. No outside power had. That was, after all, the entire point of the Wren's design. "Get me a secure channel to Commander Halverson," Reyes said. It's time she got the full briefing. Somewhere between the stars, the small gray ship called the Wren turned toward home, carrying 22 people, and a secret that was about to change how the galaxy thought about the word small. And far away, in the assembly chamber, Ambassador Kelrath sat back in his seat, 4 eyes calm and satisfied, already imagining the humiliation he was about to hand to Earth. He had no idea what was coming. Later that night, in his private quarters aboard the Vondrak embassy ship, Kelrath reviewed the human fleet registry one more time. He wanted to be completely certain before the trial. He could not afford another mistake like the one his cousin had made. He pulled up every scrap of information the Vondrak Intelligence Service had gathered on the HMS Wren. There was surprisingly little. Launch date, 5 years ago. Crew complement, 22. A strangely small number for a ship the humans still called a battleship. Hull length, 140 meters. Listed weapon systems, unknown, redacted, or simply left blank in most fields. Kelrath found this lack of information mildly annoying, but not alarming. Small ships often had small crews and simple weapons. It made sense. A hull that size could not hold much more than basic point defense guns and a light cannon or two. He had seen dozens of ships this size from a dozen different species over his long career, and none of them had ever presented a serious threat to a proper warship. He thought again about his cousin's death. He had read that report so many times he could recite it from memory. A Vondrak border cruiser, 2,200 meters long, armed with 6 plasma lances and full-point defense arrays, had encountered a single human patrol ship near the Rendell corridor. The human ship had been small. The report estimated between 1 and 200 meters, though sensor readings had been strangely inconsistent. The cruiser opened fire first. Every shot missed or was deflected. The human ship did not fire back for almost 2 full minutes, as if it were waiting for something. Then, in a burst of light that the cruiser's sensors failed to properly record, the Vondrak ship's engines failed, its weapons went dark, and it drifted, powerless, for 6 hours, before a rescue ship arrived. No one aboard the cruiser had been killed. That detail bothered Kelrath more than anything else. If the human ship could disable a target that completely, why not simply destroy it? Every serious warship in the galaxy, when given the advantage, finished the fight. The Vondrak Empire certainly did. The Threll Combine certainly did. But the humans, again and again in the reports Kelrath had gathered, seemed to prefer disabling their enemies rather than destroying them. Kelrath had 2 theories about this. The first theory, the one he preferred, was that human weapons were simply not powerful enough to destroy larger ships outright, and disabling them was the best the humans could manage. This theory fit neatly with his plan for the trial. The second theory, the one he tried not to think about too often, was that the humans were choosing not to destroy their enemies, which would mean their weapons were powerful enough that mercy, not weakness, explained the pattern. He did not like the second theory. It made his stomach feel tight in a way he did not enjoy. He closed the files and told himself, again, that he had chosen his terms carefully. Smallest ship in the registry. Whatever secrets the humans were hiding, they could only hide so much inside 140 meters of hull. Physics had limits. Everyone knew this. A ship could only be so small and still carry weapons capable of threatening something as large and well-armored as the Vondrak flagship cruiser he intended to send. A brand new vessel named the Ash Crown, only recently completed, carrying the most advanced Vondrak weapons technology available. Kelrath allowed himself a small, satisfied thought before he went to sleep that night. Whatever happened in 6 days, the galaxy would finally see proof that human ships were exactly what they appeared to be. Small, limited, beatable. He slept well that night. It would be the last time in a long while that he slept so easily. Aboard the Wren, the 6-day journey back to New Bristol gave the crew time to think, and thinking was not always comfortable. Ensign Daniel Park, the young gunnery officer who had spoken up on the bridge, found himself unable to sleep during his off-shift hours. He had joined the crew of the Wren only 4 months earlier, transferred in from a much larger cruiser, and he was still adjusting to how different life aboard a compression-class ship felt. The corridors were narrow. The crew was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's name, their habits, their favorite foods in the mess hall. It felt less like a warship and more like a tight-knit family living inside a metal tube. He found Chief Petty Officer Idris Osei in the small galley, drinking coffee alone at 2 in the morning ship time. "Can't sleep either?" Idris asked, not looking up. "No," Daniel admitted, sitting across from him. "Chief, can I ask you something? You've served on the Wren longer than almost anyone except the commander. Is this ship really ready for something like this? An assembly trial, with the whole galaxy watching?" Idris took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Let me ask you something instead," he said. "How long have you been in the fleet?" 6 years. And in 6 years, has anyone ever explained to you what the deep compression program actually does? Daniel shook his head. "Not really. I know the ships are called compression class. I always assumed it meant the hull design was compressed, like more efficient use of space, something like that." Idris almost laughed, but he caught himself, because he remembered feeling the exact same confusion when he first came aboard, 5 years earlier. "That's what most people think," he said. "It's what we let most people think. The truth is a little stranger." "Stranger how?" Idris set down his coffee cup and looked at the young ensign for a long moment, as if deciding how much to say. "You'll get the full briefing once we're back at New Bristol," he finally said. "Command will want to explain it properly, with the right people in the room. But I'll tell you this much, since you're about to fly into a fight with us, and you deserve to know you're not walking into something foolish. He tapped the metal table between them. When you look at the Wren from the outside, you see 140 meters of hull. That number is true. It is not a lie, and it is not a trick of sensors, like the ambassador probably suspects. The hull really is that small. Okay, Daniel said slowly. But a hull, Idris said, is just a container. And what's inside a container doesn't have to follow the same rules as the container itself. Not anymore. Not with what our engineers figured out 5 years ago. Daniel frowned, trying to understand. You're saying there's more space inside the ship than the hull should physically allow? Idris smiled, the first real smile Daniel had seen from him in weeks. I'm saying you should get some sleep, Ensign. You're going to want a clear head when Commander Halverson gives the full briefing. Trust me. It's better when you hear the whole thing at once, instead of in little pieces at 2 in the morning from a tired old chief. Daniel wanted to press further, but something in Idris's tone told him it would not work. He nodded, finished his own cup of coffee, and returned to his bunk. He lay awake a long while afterward, staring at the low ceiling of his small quarters, wondering what exactly the Wren was hiding, and why, after 6 years in the fleet, this was the first time anyone had hinted that there was anything to hide at all. 3 decks above him, on the bridge, Commander Alexis Halverson sat alone in the dim night cycle lighting, reviewing the same technical files that Vice Admiral Reyes had sent her hours earlier. She had commanded the Wren since its very first mission, and she had waited 5 long years for a moment exactly like this one. A moment when the galaxy's assumptions about her ship would finally be tested in the open, in front of every species that mattered, with no room left for doubt afterward. She thought about Ambassador Kelrath, a man she had never met and knew only through diplomatic reports. She thought about his careful, clever choice of terms. Smallest ship in the registry, a demand designed to guarantee an easy win. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She closed the files, leaned back in her chair, and allowed herself, for just a moment, to imagine the look on his face when he finally understood what smallest really meant, coming from a species that had learned, a long time ago, that size and strength were never quite the same thing. 6 days, she thought. 6 days until the whole galaxy finds out what we've been hiding. She was not afraid. She was, if anything, a little bit excited. The Wren continued on its course through the dark, carrying its secret quietly toward home. The HMS Wren arrived in orbit above New Bristol, 2 days ahead of schedule. Commander Alexis Halverson had pushed the engines harder than usual, not out of worry, but out of impatience. She wanted every possible hour to prepare her crew, and preparation, in this case, meant something the crew had never actually experienced before. Full activation of systems that had, until now, only existed in simulations and closed-door tests. A shuttle met the Wren in orbit, carrying Vice Admiral Thomas Reyes and Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran down to the ship's small boarding bay in person. This alone told the crew that something unusual was happening. Admirals did not normally travel to small compression-class ships. Small ships went to admirals, not the other way around. Reyes gathered the entire crew, all 22 of them, into the Wren's largest open space, a cargo bay barely large enough to hold them standing shoulder to shoulder. He looked at their faces, young and old, nervous and calm, and he began the briefing that Idris Osei had promised Daniel Park 2 nights earlier. 5 years ago, Reyes said, Fleet Command approved a project called Deep Compression. Most of you have heard that name applied to your ship's hull classification. Very few of you actually know what it means. Today, that changes. He nodded to Priya, who activated a small holographic display in the center of the room. The image showed a cutaway diagram of the Wren, but it did not match the ship the crew thought they knew. Where the crew expected to see familiar decks and corridors, the diagram showed something far larger, folded and layered in strange, overlapping patterns, like a book with far more pages than its cover should allow. This is going to sound impossible, Priya said, but I promise you, it is real, and you have been living inside it for years without fully understanding it. Every one of you already knows the Wren has more usable space inside than a 140-meter hull should physically contain. You've probably assumed the engineers were just very good at efficient design. That's what we've let people believe, both inside the fleet and outside it. The truth, Reyes continued, is that the Wren's interior is not built entirely inside its outer hull in the way a normal ship is. Using folded space compression technology, developed here on New Bristol and nowhere else in known space, the ship's actual internal volume, its decks, its systems, its weapons bays, its crew quarters, is compressed into a small external footprint using controlled pocket space folding. From the outside, sensors measure 140 meters. From the inside, if you could somehow unfold and measure everything the ship actually contains, you would be looking at internal systems equivalent to a ship nearly 2 kilometers in length. The cargo bay went completely silent. Ensign Daniel Park finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Sir, are you saying the Wren isn't really small at all? It just looks small?" "I'm saying," Reyes said, "that small was never the right word to begin with. The Wren has the external hull signature of a scout ship and the internal capacity, power generation, and weapons systems of a heavy cruiser, in some categories, systems that exceed even our largest fleet vessels, because folded space compression allows certain components to be built at scales that would be structurally impossible in normal, unfolded construction." Priya adjusted the display, and new details appeared. Massive reactor cores drawn far larger than anything that should fit inside a hull this size. Weapons arrays labeled with names the crew had never heard. Armor layers described not in simple metal thickness, but in folded space density measurements that meant nothing to most of them yet. "Why weren't we told this before?" asked Idris Osei, though his tone suggested he already suspected part of the answer. "Because secrecy was the entire point," Reyes said. "Folded space compression is, right now, the single most valuable piece of military technology humanity possesses. If word of it spread, if the Vondrak, the Threll, the Ferai, or anyone else in the assembly understood what our small ships were actually capable of, every advantage we've built over the last 5 years would disappear. Enemies would stop underestimating us. They would start building their own versions, or at least start guessing at ours, adjusting their tactics, spending resources trying to counter something they don't fully understand yet. So every time we won a fight that looked impossible," Daniel said slowly, working it through, "it wasn't luck. It wasn't some fluke. It was because you were never in the small ship everyone assumed you were in," Priya finished for him. "You were in a heavy cruiser, wearing a scout ship's skin, and almost nobody outside a very short list of people back on Earth has ever known that." The crew absorbed this in different ways. Some looked excited. A few looked almost betrayed, uncomfortable with the idea that they had been kept in partial darkness about their own ship for years. Commander Halverson, standing near the front, let them react for a moment before she spoke. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said. "I've known the full picture since I took command 5 years ago, and it still takes some getting used to. But I want to be clear about something important. Nothing about who you are, what you've trained for, or how you've operated this ship has been fake. Every drill, every system check, every combat exercise, real. The compression technology doesn't fly the ship or fire the weapons by itself. You do. All of this only matters because of the crew standing in this room." She let that settle before continuing. "In 4 days, the whole galaxy is going to watch us fight a trial against a Vondrak heavy cruiser named the Ash Crown. Ambassador Kelrath asked for our smallest ship because he believes small means weak. He is about to learn that he asked the wrong question." While the Wren's crew adjusted to the truth of their own ship, Ambassador Kelrath was making his own preparations aboard the Vondrak embassy fleet, now gathering near a neutral system chosen by assembly observers for the trial. The Ash Crown was, by any normal measure, an impressive ship. 2,200 meters long, bristling with 6 plasma lance batteries, capable of melting through kilometers of solid armor, protected by layered energy shields that had never once failed in live combat testing. Its captain, a decorated Vondrak officer named Torvin Drask, had commanded warships for over 30 years and had never lost a formal engagement. Kelrath met with Captain Drask in a private briefing room aboard the Ash Crown 2 days before the trial. Drask was broad-shouldered even by Vondrak standards, with pale gray skin marked by ceremonial battle scars he had earned honestly, decades earlier, during territorial conflicts with the Threll Combine. "You understand the terms," Kelrath said. "The human ship will be small. 140 meters, according to their registry. Do not underestimate them, simply because of past reports. Some of our intelligence suggests unusual sensor behavior around human vessels in prior engagements. But do not overestimate a target this size either. Whatever tricks they attempt, the Ash Crown's shields and armor should absorb anything a ship that small could realistically project. Drask studied a tactical display showing the Wren's registered specifications, sparse and largely incomplete. A crew of 22, he said, almost amused. The Ash Crown carries 412. If this comes down to boarding actions or prolonged engagement, there is no contest. It will not come to boarding actions, Kelrath said. This is a formal trial. Weapons engagement only, observed by neutral assembly monitors, until one ship's systems are disabled or the ship's captain formally withdraws. No boarding, no destruction beyond what combat naturally causes. We do not need to kill the crew, Captain. We only need to prove, publicly, that human ships are not the mystery everyone whispers about. A clean, visible, undeniable victory. Drask nodded slowly. And if the human ship attempts something unusual, some hidden weapon, some trick, as their strange border encounters have suggested. Kelrath considered this question carefully, remembering the report about his cousin's disabled cruiser, remembering the two theories he had turned over in his mind for weeks. The Ash Crown's shields have been rated against threats far beyond anything a 140-meter hull should be able to generate, he said, choosing his words with care. Whatever the humans have hidden in their small ships, physics still applies to them, Captain. A hull that size can only hold so much power, so many weapons, so much armor. There are limits even Earth cannot escape. He almost believed his own words completely. Almost. Drask seemed satisfied, and the meeting ended with the usual formalities. But after Kelrath left, Drask remained alone in the briefing room a while longer, staring at the sparse specifications of the human ship on the display. 30 years of command experience had taught him one lesson above all others. An enemy who seems too easy to beat is usually the most dangerous enemy of all. He had learned this lesson the hard way, early in his career, against an opponent far weaker in numbers, who had nonetheless nearly destroyed his first command through clever tactics, rather than brute strength. He set the display to alert him to any unusual readings the moment the trial began, and he ordered his shield technicians to run one additional round of diagnostics beyond what was strictly required. It could not hurt to be careful, even against a ship this small. Back on New Bristol, the final 2 days before the trial were spent in intense preparation aboard the Wren. Commander Halvorsen ran her crew through drills they had never practiced at full power before, always previously limited by strict operational security, run only in small pieces disguised as routine maintenance checks, never assembled into the complete picture the crew now finally understood. Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran remained aboard for the full 2 days, walking the crew through the true capabilities of systems they thought they already knew. The ship's primary weapon, listed publicly in the assembly registry only as a standard light cannon, was in fact a compressed mass railgun, capable of firing projectiles accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, drawing power from a reactor core, folded into a space smaller than a closet, yet generating output comparable to reactors 10 times its apparent size. The ship's shields, similarly, were not the simple point defense screens listed in public records, but a layered folded space barrier system that could, in testing, absorb direct hits from weapons rated to destroy ships many times the Wren's registered size. The tricky part, Priya explained to the assembled bridge crew during one of the final briefings, is that folded space systems take time to fully engage. When you activate full compression release, what we call unfolding a system to combat readiness, there's a brief window, usually between 90 seconds and 3 minutes depending on the system, where the ship is transitioning between its passive, compressed state and its full combat state. During that window, our systems are more vulnerable than they'll be once fully unfolded. Commander Halvorsen absorbed this carefully. So during the trial, we can't simply activate everything at once from the very first second. Correct, Priya said. If you go to full combat unfolding immediately, in plain view of the enemy and the assembly observers, they'll see exactly what you're doing before your systems finish coming online, which gives them a window to react. Our recommendation, based on the simulations we ran this week, is a staged approach. Let the Ash Crown believe, for as long as possible, that they are fighting exactly the small, weak ship they expect. Draw out the engagement, let them commit fully to their attack pattern, then unfold. Halvorsen nodded slowly, already turning the tactical possibilities over in her mind. How much of an advantage does that buy us? If executed well, Priya said, it means the Ash Crown will already be deep into an attack pattern built around assumptions that stop being true partway through. In simple terms, they'll be swinging at a fight that isn't there anymore by the time they realize it. That night, Alexis Halverson stood alone in the Wren's small observation deck, looking out at the stars beyond New Bristol, thinking about Ambassador Kelrath and Captain Drask, two men she had never met, preparing on the other side of known space for a fight they believed they had already won. She thought about her crew, 22 people who had spent years living inside a ship whose true nature they had only just discovered, who had, without knowing it, been training this entire time for exactly this moment. She thought about the word small, and how differently it was about to be understood by everyone watching, once the trial finally began. 2 days, she thought. 2 days until Praxis Vale, and the whole galaxy learns what Earth has been building in the quiet dark. One small, patient ship at a time. She turned from the window, walked back toward her quarters, and allowed herself, finally, to get some rest before the fight that would decide far more than just a mineral-rich system between two rival powers. The following morning, Vice Admiral Reyes called Commander Halverson into a private meeting aboard the orbital station above New Bristol. This briefing, unlike the earlier one, was not for the whole crew. It was for her alone, and it concerned something even Dr. Chandrasekaran had only mentioned in passing. There's a piece of this I haven't explained yet, Reyes said, once the door had sealed behind them. Something the Assembly observers don't know, and something I need you to understand before you fly into that trial. Alexis waited, arms crossed, listening. Folded space compression wasn't originally designed as a weapons platform, Reyes said. It started as a life support project, nearly 15 years ago, meant to let colony ships carry more supplies without increasing hull mass for fuel efficiency reasons. The weapons and armor applications came later, almost by accident, when one of our engineers realized the same folding principles that let you store more cargo in less space could also let you store more war-making capability in less space. Compression-class ships like the Wren are the result of that accident, refined over the last 5 years into something genuinely dangerous. I know the history, Alexis said gently. Priya walked us through most of it yesterday. She walked you through the technical history, Reyes said. I want to talk about the strategic history. Because there's a reason Fleet Command chose you, specifically, for this trial, and it isn't only because the Wren happened to be the smallest hull in the registry. Alexis raised an eyebrow. I assumed that was exactly why. It's part of it, Reyes admitted, but we could have built a smaller compression-class hull if we'd wanted to guarantee that outcome. We didn't. We built the Wren at 140 meters, specifically because that size sat at an interesting point in assembly registry categories, small enough to be dismissed, but large enough to house a genuinely serious set of compressed systems without pushing the folding technology past what we could reliably control. We've known for 2 years that a challenge like this was likely to happen eventually. Someone, sooner or later, was going to ask for our smallest ship, expecting an easy win. We wanted to be ready when it did. Alexis absorbed this, so this wasn't a surprise to command. You knew Kelrath, or someone like him, was going to make this exact demand. We suspected it, Reyes said. Vondrak pride runs deep, and Praxis Vale has been a point of tension for over a year. We didn't know the exact moment, but we prepared for it. And you were chosen to command the Wren 5 years ago, in part, because your service record showed exactly the kind of patience this mission would eventually require. A lot of officers want to prove themselves immediately, loudly, as soon as possible. You've never been like that. You wait. You let the situation reveal itself before you act. That quality is going to matter more in this trial than almost anything else we've built into the ship itself. Alexis considered this quietly. She thought of her early career, years before compression-class ships existed, serving under commanders who valued exactly the instincts Reyes was now describing back to her. The discipline to hold back, to let an opponent overextend, to strike only when the moment was fully ready, rather than the moment merely available. There's one more thing, Reyes said, his tone shifting slightly. I need you to understand what happens after the trial, regardless of the outcome. Once you unfold the Wren's full systems in front of assembly observers, the secret is out. Every species in that chamber will know, within hours, that human small ships are not what they appear to be. That changes things. Our advantage of surprise disappears the moment your shields activate in front of their sensors. I understand, Alexis said. Do you? Reyes asked, not unkindly. Because after this, the galaxy adjusts. Other species will start researching folded space technology of their own, now that they know it's possible. Some will succeed, eventually. Others will simply change their tactics, stop underestimating small human ships, and force us to rely on other advantages. This trial isn't just about winning one fight over one system. It's the end of an era we've quietly enjoyed for 5 years, and the beginning of something more complicated. Alexis nodded slowly, understanding fully now why Reyes had wanted this conversation held privately, away from even her own trusted crew. Then we'd better make sure it's worth it, she said. Make sure that when the secret comes out, it comes out the way we want it to, not as a trick that embarrasses Kelrath, but as proof of something bigger, that Earth doesn't need to be big to be strong. That we build differently, and we win differently, and we've been holding back this entire time out of choice, not weakness. Reyes allowed himself a small, proud smile, the first genuine one Alexis had seen from him in weeks of tense preparation. That, he said, is exactly the message Command is hoping this trial sends, not just to the Vondrak, to everyone watching. He extended a hand, and Alexis shook it firmly. Good luck out there, Commander, he said. Praxis Vale, and a lot more than Praxis Vale, is riding on what happens in that system 2 days from now. We won't let you down, Admiral, Alexis said. She left the meeting with a clearer sense of purpose than she had carried in years of quiet patrols and simulated drills. This was no longer only about defending a mineral-rich border system, or answering one arrogant ambassador's calculated insult. It was about the moment humanity finally stopped hiding, and showed the galaxy exactly what its patience had been building toward all along. 2 days later, the Wren left New Bristol's orbit, small and gray and unremarkable to any sensor sweep that measured only its hull, and set course for the neutral coordinates where the assembly trial would take place, carrying 22 crew members, one carefully guarded secret, and a captain, who intended to make Ambassador Kelrath regret every assumption he had ever made about the word smallest. The neutral system chosen for the assembly trial had no official name, only a catalog number, but everyone had started calling it the Vale Marker, since it sat exactly on the border between Vondrak and human claims near Praxis Vale. It was an unremarkable system, a single dim orange star, with no habitable planets, only a scattering of rocky debris, and one small moon, that served as a fixed reference point for the trial's boundaries. Assembly observer ships arrived first, 3 of them, each crewed by a small neutral team, drawn from species with no stake in the Praxis Vale dispute. Their job was simple: watch, record, and confirm to the wider galaxy that whatever happened next followed the old rules fairly. The Ash Crown arrived next, sliding into position with the slow, deliberate confidence of a ship that had never lost a fight. 2,200 meters of dark gray hull, its 6 plasma lance batteries clearly visible along its spine, its shields already active in a faint shimmer around the entire vessel. Captain Torvin Drask stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display, waiting. Ambassador Kelrath had traveled aboard a separate observer vessel, close enough to watch but far enough to remain safely outside the trial boundary. He sat in a private viewing chamber, 4 eyes fixed on the main display, already composing in his mind the announcement he would make to the assembly once the trial concluded. Then the Wren arrived. It came out of transit quietly, without fanfare, sliding into position at the edge of the trial boundary, exactly as the rules required. On every sensor screen across the system, it appeared exactly as its registry entry promised: 140 meters of gray hull, small and simple, next to the towering mass of the Ash Crown. Kelrath leaned forward slightly, watching the tiny shape on his display. He allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. There it was. Exactly as small as promised. Aboard the Ash Crown, Captain Drask studied the same sensor image with a more careful eye, remembering his earlier unease. He ran one final diagnostic on his shields, confirmed full power across all 6 plasma lance batteries, and gave the order to hold position and await the formal trial signal. The assembly observer ships broadcast the opening notice across all channels, a formal recitation of the old law: 1 ship from each side, weapons engagement only, until one vessel's systems were disabled or its captain formally withdrew the claim. No boarding actions. No use of weapons beyond what the trial required. The loser's side would withdraw its claim to Praxis Vale, permanently, under binding assembly law. Aboard the Wren, Commander Alexis Halverson sat in her chair, watching the same broadcast on her own bridge display. Her crew stood ready at their stations. Idris Osei at the helm, Daniel Park at the gunnery console, the rest scattered through the small ship's compact bridge and systems rooms, every one of them fully briefed now on what their ship truly was, and what it was about to do. "Systems status," Alexis said calmly. "All systems nominal, Commander," came the reply. "Compression state stable. Ready to begin staged unfolding sequence on your order." "Not yet," Alexis said. "We wait." The trial signal activated. The old law's opening chime rang out across every channel in the system, audible to every observer, every crew member, every ambassador watching from a safe distance. The engagement had formally begun. For nearly 10 full seconds, nothing happened. Neither ship moved. It was, in its own way, a strange kind of tension. Two vessels facing each other across empty space, one massive and confident, one small and apparently helpless, both waiting for the other to make the first move. Then, the Ash Crown fired. The first plasma lance shot lanced across the distance between the two ships in less than a second, a beam of superheated energy, capable of cutting through kilometers of solid armor. Kelrath, watching from his observer vessel, leaned forward eagerly, expecting the trial to end almost as quickly as it had begun. The beam struck the Wren's shields and dispersed. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was almost anticlimactic, a brief flare of light along the Wren's hull, a shimmer of energy absorbed and scattered, and then nothing. The small ship remained exactly where it had been, undamaged, its systems reading fully nominal. On the Ash Crown's bridge, Captain Drask frowned at his tactical display. "Report," he said sharply. "Full power hit. Direct contact, Captain." His weapons officer replied, confused. "Shields held. No apparent damage to the target." "Fire again," Drask ordered. All batteries, full spread. 6 plasma lances fired in near simultaneous sequence, a wall of superheated energy, converging on the small human ship from every angle the Ash Crown's weapons could reach. To any casual observer, it looked impossible for anything that size to survive such an attack. The Wren's shields flared brightly across its entire hull, absorbing the combined impact of 6 plasma lance strikes at once. When the light faded, the ship was still there, still undamaged, still holding its position exactly where it had started. In his private viewing chamber, Ambassador Kelrath's satisfied breath caught in his throat. His 4 eyes stayed fixed on the display, waiting for some explanation, some indication that this was merely a delayed reaction, a shield system finally beginning to fail after absorbing such tremendous force. The Wren's shields did not fail. The readings on Kelrath's own display showed shield integrity at 98%, barely scratched by an attack that should have overwhelmed a ship its size several times over. That's not possible," Kelrath murmured to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "A hull that size cannot generate shields capable of absorbing 6 plasma lance strikes." But it had. The numbers on his own screen confirmed it, and numbers, unlike pride, did not lie. Aboard the Ash Crown, Captain Drask's earlier unease sharpened into something closer to alarm. 30 years of command experience told him that something was very wrong with this engagement, something that did not match any prior report he had studied about human ships this size. "Continue firing," he ordered, though his voice carried less certainty now than it had moments earlier. "Full sustained barrage, all batteries. Something must give eventually." The Ash Crown's plasma lances fired again and again, an unrelenting assault that would have reduced almost any other ship its opponent's registered size to scrap metal within the first 30 seconds of engagement. The Wren's shields absorbed strike after strike, flaring brightly with each impact but never once failing, never once showing more than minor fluctuations in the ship's overall power readings. On the Wren's bridge, the crew watched their own instruments with a strange mixture of calm and quiet excitement. This was, after all, exactly what months of briefings and simulations had prepared them for, watching their small ship absorb attacks that should have destroyed it several times over, while their true capabilities remained carefully, deliberately hidden beneath the surface. Shield integrity holding at 96%. reported the systems officer. Minor fluctuation from sustained impact, nothing concerning. Good, Alexis said. Hold position. Do not return fire yet. Daniel Park, seated at the gunnery console, glanced back toward the command chair. Commander, we could end this right now. One shot from the compressed railgun would... Not yet, Ensign, Alexis said, her voice calm but firm. Let them keep committing. Let them use up their confidence along with their ammunition. We agreed to a staged approach, and we're sticking to it. Daniel nodded, turning back to his console, though his hands remained tense over the controls, ready the moment the order finally came. The engagement continued for nearly 4 full minutes, an unusually long duration for what most observers had expected to be a swift, one-sided demonstration. The Ashcrown fired continuously, cycling through its plasma lance batteries as quickly as they could recharge, while the Wren simply held its position, absorbing every strike, its shields flaring brightly against the darkness of the veil marker system. Across the wider galaxy, the trial broadcast was drawing an enormous audience. Assembly observer feeds relayed real-time footage to every member species, and what should have been a quick, predictable outcome was instead becoming something far stranger. Species who had never paid much attention to human military capabilities suddenly found themselves watching closely, murmuring among themselves, as minute after minute passed, without the small ship's shields showing any sign of true failure. The quiet, insect-like Farai, watching from their own observation post far across the galaxy, exchanged a series of soft clicking sounds among themselves, the closest thing their species had to open surprise, as the engagement stretched past the 3-minute mark, with the human ship still fully intact. Aboard the Ashcrown, Captain Drask finally ordered a pause in the barrage, watching his own power readings with growing concern. Sustained plasma lance fire at this intensity was beginning to draw down his ship's reserves faster than he had anticipated for what was supposed to be a swift, decisive engagement. "Cease fire," he ordered. "Reassess." The bridge fell into an uneasy quiet. Drask studied the tactical display, watching the small, undamaged shape of the Wren sitting exactly where it had started, its shield still holding at over 90% integrity, despite everything the Ashcrown had thrown at it. "This is not possible," he said quietly, almost to himself. "A ship that size cannot sustain shields at this level. The power requirements alone would exceed." He stopped himself, a cold realization beginning to form at the edge of his thoughts, the same uneasy feeling he had carried since studying the human ship's sparse registry entry 2 days earlier. An enemy who seems too easy to beat is usually the most dangerous enemy of all. In his private viewing chamber, Ambassador Kelrath watched the pause in the engagement, with a growing, uncomfortable knot forming in his stomach. 4 minutes. 6 full plasma lance batteries fired repeatedly at point-blank range, and the small human ship remained, unmoved, unbroken, exactly where it had started. He thought of his cousin's disabled cruiser, drifting powerless for 6 hours after a single small human ship had engaged it. He thought of the 2 theories he had turned over in his mind for weeks, and the second one, the one he had tried not to think about too often, began to feel less like an uncomfortable possibility and more like an approaching certainty. Aboard the Wren, Commander Halverson watched the Ashcrown's weapons fall silent, watched the enemy ship hold its position, clearly reassessing, clearly uncertain for the first time since the trial had begun. She allowed herself a small, quiet smile. "They're wondering what they're actually fighting," she said to her bridge crew. "Good. Let them wonder a little longer." She turned to Idris Osei at the helm. "Hold position. Let's see what Captain Drask decides to do next." The Ashcrown hung motionless in the dark, its captain staring at numbers that made no sense, its ambassador watching from a distance with a growing dread he could no longer fully suppress, while the small gray ship at the center of it all waited patiently, exactly as it had been built to do, for the moment its true size would finally be revealed. On the Ashcrown's bridge, Captain Drask called his senior officers together for a brief, urgent conference at the rear of the command deck, away from the main crew stations, though the tension in his voice carried far enough that everyone nearby could hear it. "Options," he said simply. His weapons officer, a younger Vondrak named Bellic Tor, spoke first. "Captain, our power reserves are down to 71% after 4 minutes of sustained fire. If we continue at this rate, we'll need to break for a recharge cycle within another 6 minutes." "Unacceptable," Drask said. Withdrawing to recharge mid-trial, would be seen across the entire assembly as a failure of nerve, regardless of the technical justification. We cannot afford that, not with the ambassador watching, not with every species in the galaxy watching. Then what would you have us do, Captain? Tor asked. Our strongest weapons have made no visible impact on their shields. If this is truly the limit of what we can achieve. It is not the limit, Drask said, cutting him off, though his own confidence in that statement felt thinner than it had an hour earlier. There are still options. Concentrated fire on a single shield facet, rather than spreading our barrage evenly, might overwhelm a localized section faster than the ship can redistribute power to compensate. It is a slower approach, but a more precise one. Tor nodded slowly, though his expression remained uneasy. And if concentrated fire fails as well? Drask did not answer immediately. He looked instead at the tactical display, at the small, patient shape of the Wren sitting exactly where it had started, its shields glowing faintly from the residual heat of the barrage, showing no sign of true weakness anywhere. Then we will have learned something important about the nature of this trial, Drask finally said, and about the nature of the ship we are truly facing. He returned to his command chair and gave the order. Concentrated fire. All 6 plasma lance batteries focused on a single point along the Wren's forward shield arc, sustained as long as power reserves would allow. The Ashcrown's weapons fired again, this time as a single focused beam of combined energy striking the exact same point on the Wren's shields again and again, a technique designed to punch through localized weaknesses that a distributed barrage might miss. Aboard the Wren, the systems officer's voice carried a note of mild concern for the first time since the engagement began. Commander, they've shifted to concentrated fire on our forward shield facet, localized integrity dropping faster than the rest of the shield array, down to 89% in that section specifically, though overall shield strength remains stable. Alexis studied the readings calmly. This too had been anticipated in the simulations, though seeing it happen in real combat carried a different weight than watching it unfold on a training display. Redistribute power slightly to reinforce the forward facet, she said. Not fully. Let them believe they're making progress. Just enough to hold the line without revealing how much reserve capacity we actually have. Understood, Commander, came the reply, and a moment later, the localized shield readings stabilized, the rate of degradation slowing considerably, though not stopping entirely. Idris Osei glanced back from the helm. They're going to notice the stabilization eventually, Commander. It'll look strange if a ship this size can perfectly redirect power reserves mid-barrage. Let it look strange, Alexis said. Strange is exactly what we want them thinking right now. Confused, strange, uncertain. That's exactly the state of mind Captain Drask needs to be in when we finally unfold. On the Ashcrown, the concentrated barrage continued for another 2 full minutes. Plasma lance batteries firing in tight, disciplined sequence, targeting the same section of the Wren's shields with mechanical precision. The localized shield integrity dropped further, down to 71%, then 68%, the numbers falling slowly enough that it appeared, at least on the surface, that the Ashcrown's persistence might eventually be rewarded. Captain Drask watched the numbers with the first genuine flicker of hope he had allowed himself since the engagement began. Continue, he ordered. We're making progress. Hold the concentrated pattern. But the numbers, watched carefully enough, told a more complicated story than simple progress. The rate of decline, rather than accelerating as a truly overwhelmed shield system should, remained oddly consistent, almost too consistent, as if something behind the scenes were carefully managing exactly how much damage appeared to register with each passing second. Bellic Tor noticed this pattern first, frowning at his own console. Captain, the decline rate is unusually steady. I would expect an overwhelmed shield facet to fail, with increasing speed, as the underlying systems struggle to compensate. This looks almost too controlled. Drask's earlier hope curdled slightly at the observation. Explain what you mean. I mean, Captain, Tor said carefully, that this could be exactly what it appears to be. A shield system slowly failing under pressure. Or it could be something else entirely. A ship deliberately managing how much apparent damage we're allowed to see. The bridge fell quiet again, the same uneasy quiet that had settled over the crew after the initial barrage failed to produce any real effect. Drask stared at the tactical display, at the small human ship absorbing everything the Ashcrown could throw at it, and felt, for the first time in 30 years of command, a genuine and unfamiliar sensation creeping into the edges of his composure. He was beginning to suspect that he was not fighting the ship he thought he was fighting at all. "Captain," Tor said quietly, "power reserves are now down to 54%. If we continue at this rate for much longer, we will be forced to break off regardless of the outcome, simply to avoid leaving ourselves vulnerable." Drask weighed his options one final time. Breaking off now, after nearly 7 minutes of continuous, unsuccessful barrage, would look almost as bad to the watching assembly as an outright loss. But continuing blindly, against an enemy whose true capabilities remained completely unknown, carried its own serious risks. He made his decision. "Continue the barrage," he said. "Full commitment. We will not be the ones remembered for backing away from a trial we demanded ourselves." Aboard the observer vessel, Ambassador Kelrath watched this exchange play out across the shared tactical feeds available to assembly observers, his 4 eyes moving rapidly between different data streams, trying to make sense of numbers that stubbornly refused to align with anything he had expected. 7 minutes. 54% power reserves, on a ship that should have ended this engagement within the first 30 seconds. He thought again of his cousin, of the disabled cruiser drifting powerless for 6 hours, of the strange, quiet mercy the humans had shown by disabling rather than destroying. He thought of the small human ship's captain, somewhere aboard that patient, unmoving vessel, watching his own ash crown burn through its reserves against a target that refused to break. For the first time since he had issued his challenge in the assembly chamber 6 days earlier, Ambassador Kelrath felt something he had not expected to feel at all. He felt afraid. Aboard the Wren, Commander Halverson watched the Ash Crown's continued barrage with calm, careful patience, checking the ship's own power reserves one final time before making her decision. "Localized shield integrity at 61% and holding steady," the systems officer reported. "Overall power reserves at 94%. We could sustain this pattern for a very long time, Commander." "We won't need to," Alexis said, watching the tactical display, watching the Ash Crown's own reserves continue to drop with every passing second of sustained fire. "They're close to their breaking point. A little longer." She thought of Vice Admiral Reyes's words from 2 days earlier, that this trial was not just about winning, but about how the victory was won, and what message it sent to a watching galaxy. She thought about Captain Drask, whose persistence, however misguided, showed a kind of discipline she genuinely respected, even as she waited patiently for the moment to reveal exactly what the Ash Crown had truly been fighting all along. 10 more seconds, she said quietly. "Then we show them." The bridge crew of the Wren straightened at their stations, hands steady over their controls, waiting for the order that would finally end the long, careful patience of the last 5 years, and reveal, to Captain Drask, to Ambassador Kelrath, and to the entire watching galaxy, exactly what humanity's smallest battleship had truly been hiding all along. "Now," Commander Alexis Halverson said. The order carried no drama in her voice, no shout, no dramatic pause. It was simply a word, spoken calmly, the way she might have ordered a routine course correction. But aboard the Wren, that single word set into motion a sequence that 5 years of quiet, patient engineering had built toward. "Beginning full unfolding sequence," the systems officer confirmed. "Compression state releasing across all primary systems." On every sensor screen across the Veil marker system, something began to happen that no observer, no ambassador, no captain had ever seen before. The small gray shape of the Wren, 140 meters of hull that had held steady and unremarkable throughout 7 minutes of sustained combat, began to change. It did not grow in the way a normal object grows. There was no visible expansion of metal, no plates unfolding outward like some kind of transforming toy. Instead, the space around the ship itself seemed to shift, as if reality had been holding its breath around the vessel, and was only now allowed to exhale. Sensor readings that had registered 140 meters for 7 straight minutes suddenly began climbing. 180, 300, 600, faster and faster, numbers rising in ways that made no sense to instruments built to measure ordinary matter in ordinary space. Aboard the Ash Crown, Bellic Tor stared at his console in open disbelief. "Captain, sensor readings on the target are..." "Captain, this cannot be correct. Hull measurement climbing rapidly. 1,000 meters, 1,400. It's still climbing." Captain Torvin Drask stood slowly from his command chair, his pale gray face fixed on the main view screen, watching the impossible unfold in real time. Where a small, patient ship had sat motionless for the last 7 minutes, something else now occupied that same point in space. Something the sensors struggled to fully define, edges shimmering faintly as folded space systems settled into their final combat configuration. 1,900 meters, Tor said, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain, it has matched our own hull length. It's still climbing. The final reading settled at 2,100 meters, nearly matching the Ash Crown's own 2,200 meters. Close enough that whatever advantage of scale Captain Drask had walked into this trial believing he possessed had simply, quietly, evaporated in the span of a few seconds. But hull length, as Ambassador Kelrath was only now beginning to truly understand, watching from his observer vessel with growing horror, had never been the real measure of the Wren's danger. That danger had always lived inside the compressed folds of space that hull length alone could never capture. Weapons systems fully unfolded, the Wren systems officer reported. Primary compressed mass railgun online. Secondary point defense arrays online. Shield generation increased 300% across all facets. Reactor output at full capacity. Alexis Halverson sat calmly in her command chair, watching her own tactical display update with numbers that, even after years of simulation and preparation, still carried a certain quiet satisfaction to finally see confirmed in live combat. Status of the Ash Crown, she said. Enemy power reserves, at 48%, following sustained barrage, came the reply. Shield strength nominal, but their sustained fire output has clearly drawn down their reserves faster than anticipated on their end. Good, Alexis said. Ensign Park, you've been patient. Prepare the railgun. Single shot, targeted at their forward shield array. Not to destroy, but to demonstrate. Let's show Captain Drask exactly what he's actually been fighting. Daniel Park's hands moved across his console with practiced precision. All the nervousness from earlier days now settled into focused calm. Months of training and years of the ship's own quiet preparation had led to exactly this moment. Railgun charged and ready, Commander. Awaiting your order. Fire. The Wren's compressed mass railgun released a single projectile, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed by a reactor core that, unfolded now to its true scale, drew power output far beyond anything the Ash Crown's own systems could match. The shot crossed the distance between the two ships in a fraction of a second, striking the Ash Crown's forward shield array directly. The impact was unlike anything the plasma lance exchanges had produced. The Ash Crown's shields, rated to absorb attacks from ships many times its own size, flared with a violent brightness that lit up the entire system for a brief instant, and then failed entirely across the forward third of the ship. Alarms erupted across the Ash Crown's bridge, as damage control systems registered a breach in the outer hull layers, though the compressed mass round had been carefully calibrated to stop short of critical structural systems. A demonstration of force, not an attempt at destruction. Shields down to 31% overall, Tor shouted over the alarms. Forward section shields failed entirely. Hull breach reported on decks 4 through 7, no casualties, automated bulkheads sealing. Captain Drask gripped the edge of his command chair, staring at the tactical display, at the numbers that told a story his mind struggled to fully accept, even as he watched it happen in front of him. One shot. A single shot from a ship that, 7 minutes earlier, he had dismissed as too small to pose any serious threat at all, had done more damage to the Ash Crown than the Ash Crown's own sustained full-power barrage had managed against the Wren in 7 full minutes of continuous fire. Report on the target, he said, his voice tight. Wren's shields report no damage, Captain, Tor said quietly. The compressed mass round was fired from what our own sensors now register as a hidden weapons bay. We had no indication such a system existed until the moment it fired. Drask closed his eyes briefly. 30 years of command experience settling around him like a weight he had not expected to carry today. He understood, now, with complete and total clarity, exactly what kind of trap he had walked his ship into. Not a trap set by trickery or deceit, but a trap set entirely by his own assumptions, by Ambassador Kelrath's careful but fatally mistaken choice of terms, by an entire galaxy's shared belief that a ship's size could always be measured simply by looking at it from the outside. Aboard his observer vessel, Ambassador Kelrath watched the exchange with his 4 eyes wide, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by a cold, sinking understanding of exactly what he had done. He had demanded humanity's smallest battleship, believing smallest meant weakest, believing the old, simple rules of galactic warfare still applied to a species that had, it now seemed clear, quietly rewritten those rules years earlier, without telling anyone. He thought of his cousin's cruiser, disabled but never destroyed, drifting powerless for 6 hours before rescue arrived. He understood now, with painful clarity, that the mercy shown that day had never been a sign of weak weapons. It had been a choice, a deliberate, controlled restraint from a species that could have destroyed that cruiser outright and simply chose not to. He wondered, with a growing dread, whether that same restraint would be extended to Captain Drask and the 412 crew members aboard the Ashcrown today. Aboard the Wren, Commander Halverson watched the Ashcrown's shields flicker weakly at 31%, watched the enemy ship's own tactical readouts, visible now on shared assembly observer feeds, show power reserves continuing to drop even without further engagement, strained by the damage the single shot had caused. "Commander," Daniel Park said quietly from the gunnery console, "one more shot would end this. Their shields wouldn't survive a second hit." Alexis considered this for a long moment, watching the display, thinking about everything Vice Admiral Reyes had told her 2 days earlier, about what this trial truly meant, about the message it needed to send once the secret finally came out. "No," she said. "Open a direct channel to the Ashcrown." A moment later, the connection opened, and Captain Torvin Drask's face appeared on the Wren's bridge display. A proud, battle-scarred Vondrak officer, 30 years of command experience etched into every line of his expression, now looking at the small human commander, with an emotion that mixed disbelief, respect, and something close to resignation. "Commander," Drask said, his voice carefully controlled despite everything that had just happened, "I assume you called to demand my withdrawal from the trial." "I called," Alexis said, "to offer you the chance to withdraw with your ship, and your crew, fully intact. Your shields won't survive another hit like the last one, Captain. Neither, I suspect, will several hundred people currently serving under your command. I don't want that outcome. I don't think you want it either." Drask was quiet for a long moment, studying the human commander's face on his own display, searching for some trace of mockery or cruelty in her expression, and finding none. "You could have destroyed my ship already," he said slowly. "Your first shot could have ended the Ashcrown entirely, rather than merely breaching our forward hull. Why show restraint now, after proving your point so thoroughly?" "Because proving a point and destroying 412 people are two very different things," Alexis said simply. "We didn't come here today to kill your crew, Captain. We came here to settle a territorial claim under assembly law, and to correct a mistaken assumption about what smallest actually means. Both of those goals have now been achieved. There's no reason for this to go any further." Drask absorbed this for a long moment, 30 years of pride and discipline warring visibly across his features, before something in him finally settled. He straightened in his command chair, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the formal weight of assembly law rather than personal defeat. "Under the terms of this trial," he said, "I formally withdraw the Vondrak Empire's claim to Praxis Vale, and acknowledge the outcome of this engagement as binding under assembly law." He paused, and something more personal crept back into his tone. "For what it's worth, Commander, in 30 years of command, I have never faced an opponent who held such complete advantage and chose to use so little of it. I will remember that." "I hope you do, Captain," Alexis said. "I hope everyone watching today remembers it, for reasons that go well beyond one mineral system." The channel closed. Aboard the Wren's bridge, a quiet ripple of relief passed through the crew. 22 people who had spent 7 tense minutes, proving something the whole galaxy would remember for a long time to come, without a single life lost on either side. But the trial's true consequences were only just beginning. Across every assembly observer feed, across every species watching from their own worlds and ships and stations, footage of the engagement was already spreading. The small ship's impossible transformation, the single devastating shot, the captain's careful, deliberate restraint afterward. Within hours, the entire galaxy would be asking the same question that Ambassador Kelrath now sat with alone in his private viewing chamber, staring at nothing, turning over in his mind again and again. If this was what Earth's smallest battleship could do, quietly, patiently, without ever needing to show its full hand until the very last moment, what, exactly, did humanity's largest ships look like, and what were they still carefully, deliberately keeping hidden from a galaxy that had spent decades badly underestimating them? He did not have an answer. He suspected, with a growing unease that would follow him for a long time afterward, that very few people in the assembly chamber would sleep easily again, once they understood the true scale of what they had just witnessed. Aboard the Wren, once the channel with the ash crown had closed and the immediate tension of the engagement had finally eased, Commander Halverson allowed herself a slow breath and looked around at her bridge crew. 22 faces, some still tight with adrenaline, some already breaking into quiet, relieved smiles, all of them aware that they had just been part of something that would be studied and discussed across the galaxy for years to come. "System status," she said, more out of habit than urgency now. "All systems nominal, Commander," the systems officer reported. "Shield integrity at 99%. Reactor output stable. No damage sustained throughout the engagement. Power reserves? 91% remaining, even after full unfolding and the railgun discharge." A few quiet chuckles moved through the bridge at that number. Nearly 7 minutes of sustained enemy fire. A single devastating shot in return, and the Wren still carried more reserve power than the Ash Crown had possessed at the very start of the engagement. Idris Osei glanced back from the helm, a rare, genuine grin breaking across his usually composed face. "I have to admit, Commander, even after 5 years aboard this ship, watching those numbers unfold in real combat was something else entirely." "It was for all of us," Alexis said. "Good work, everyone. All of you. This wasn't just a demonstration of what the ship could do. It was a demonstration of what this crew could do, holding steady through 7 minutes of sustained fire, without so much as raising your voices." Daniel Park, still seated at the gunnery console, looked down at his hands, only now noticing how tightly he had been gripping the edges of his controls throughout the engagement. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension finally drain out of his shoulders. "Commander," he said, "can I ask something?" "Go ahead, Ensign." Captain Drask said something at the end there, that in 30 years of command, he'd never faced an opponent who held such an advantage, and used so little of it. Was that always the plan? To hold back like that, even after we'd already proven the point? Alexis considered the question carefully before answering, aware that her response would matter to a crew still processing everything they had just experienced. "It was always the plan," she said. "Fleet Command was very clear about this before we left New Bristol. This trial was never just about winning a fight over Praxis Vale, or even about revealing what compression-class ships can really do. It was about what kind of message that reveal sends to the rest of the galaxy." She stood from her command chair and walked slowly toward the center of the bridge, looking at each of her crew members in turn. "If we had destroyed the Ash Crown outright, today's story becomes a story about a dangerous, unpredictable new threat, a species that hid its true strength for years and then unleashed it without mercy the first chance it got. That story makes every other species in the assembly afraid of us, and fear, in the long run, tends to lead to more conflict, not less. But if the story instead becomes about a species that held overwhelming advantage and chose restraint, chose to spare an enemy crew once the point had been made, that's a very different story. That's the story of a species other civilizations might actually be able to trust, eventually, even after learning we've been quietly more powerful than anyone realized." The bridge was quiet for a moment, the crew absorbing this in a way that went beyond simple relief at having survived the engagement unscathed. "It's the same reason those old border encounters ended the way they did," Alexis continued. "The ones Ambassador Kelrath studied so carefully before choosing his terms for this trial. Disabling ships instead of destroying them wasn't a sign that our weapons were weak. It was always a choice, a hard one, sometimes, because restraint takes more discipline than simply finishing a fight the moment you're able to. But it's a choice Fleet Command has made consistently, for exactly the reason I just described, long before compression-class ships like the Wren ever existed." Daniel nodded slowly, something settling into place in his understanding that went beyond the technical briefings of the last few days. "So today wasn't just about proving we're not weak," he said. "It was about proving what kind of strong we actually are." "Exactly," Alexis said, a small proud smile crossing her face. And I think, judging by the look on Captain Drask's face when the channel closed, that message came through loud and clear. Word of the trial's outcome spread across the assembly within hours, exactly as Vice Admiral Reyes had predicted. Observer footage, carefully verified and distributed by the neutral monitoring teams, showed every stage of the engagement in full detail. The small ship's impossible transformation, the single overwhelming shot, and Commander Halverson's calm, deliberate offer of mercy once the outcome had been decided. Across a dozen worlds, in a dozen different council chambers, the same conversation began to unfold in different languages and different voices, all circling the same uncomfortable realization. If this was Earth's smallest, most easily dismissed battleship, deliberately built to look weak from the outside, while carrying strength enough to humble one of the Vondrak Empire's newest heavy cruisers, then every previous assumption about human military capability needed to be reconsidered from the ground up. The quiet, insect-like Farai, who rarely commented publicly on assembly matters, issued an unusually direct statement through their small diplomatic mission, a brief, careful acknowledgement that human restraint during the engagement had been noted and would be remembered favorably in future dealings between their two species. It was, by Farai standards, practically an outpouring of open praise. Aboard the Vondrak embassy fleet, Ambassador Kelrath faced a far less comfortable reception. His superiors back home, reviewing the same observer footage that the rest of the galaxy had already seen, were not pleased with the outcome of a trial he himself had proposed, under terms he himself had chosen. The humiliation of losing Praxis Vale was compounded by the far larger humiliation of having personally handed humanity the perfect stage to reveal, on the galaxy's own terms, a capability the Vondrak Empire had never suspected existed. Kelrath spent the following days drafting careful diplomatic messages, trying to frame the outcome in terms that minimized his own miscalculation, but the truth was plain enough for anyone paying attention. He had asked for humanity's smallest battleship, certain that smallest meant weakest, and the galaxy had watched, in real time, exactly how wrong that assumption had been. Aboard the Wren, still holding position near the Vale marker system as assembly officials finalized the formal transfer of Praxis Vale's territorial claim, Commander Halverson received a priority message from Vice Admiral Reyes back on New Bristol. She read it on her private console, alone in her quarters, and allowed herself a rare, quiet moment of satisfaction. The message was brief. "Well done, Commander. Exactly the outcome we hoped for. Bring the Wren home, and prepare for the conversations that are about to follow. Because after today, the entire galaxy is going to want to understand exactly what Earth has been building, and why we chose to keep it hidden for so long." Alexis set the message aside, and looked out through the small viewport of her quarters, at the distant, dim orange star of the Vale marker system, thinking about everything that had happened, and everything that was still to come. The trial was over, the secret was out, and the real work? Explaining to a wary, watching galaxy exactly what kind of strength humanity had chosen to build, and why restraint had always been as much a part of that strength as any weapon, was only just beginning. 3 weeks after the trial at the Vale marker system, the assembly chamber was fuller than it had been in years. Every seat was occupied, and additional observer stations had been added along the walls to accommodate delegations that did not normally bother attending routine sessions. Word had spread that Earth's ambassador would be addressing the full assembly directly about the events at Praxis Vale, and no one wanted to miss it. Diane Okafor stood at the center of the chamber, exactly where Ambassador Kelrath had stood 3 weeks earlier when he first issued his challenge. She looked around at the gathered delegates, the tall gray Vondrak, the armored Threll, the quiet, watchful Farai, and a dozen other species besides, all of them waiting to hear what Earth had to say, now that its carefully guarded secret had been revealed to the entire galaxy. 3 weeks ago, Diane began, Ambassador Kelrath asked us to send our smallest battleship into a formal trial. We agreed to those terms. We sent the Wren, 140 meters of hull, the smallest vessel in our entire fleet registry. Many of you watched what happened next. A murmur passed through the chamber, delegates shifting in their seats, the memory of the observer footage still fresh in everyone's mind. "I know there are questions," Diane continued. "I know many of you are wondering what else we've been hiding, what our larger ships are truly capable of, and why we chose to keep something like folded space compression technology secret for as long as we did. I intend to answer those questions honestly, because I think honesty, at this point, serves everyone better than continued mystery." She paused, letting the chamber settle into full attention before continuing. "Folded space compression technology allows us to build ships whose internal capacity, weapons, shields, power generation, crew facilities, significantly exceeds what their external hull measurements would normally suggest. The Wren, at 140 meters, carried capabilities roughly equivalent to a heavy cruiser, several times its registered size. We have been quietly developing and deploying this technology for the last 5 years, and yes, we chose not to disclose it publicly during that time." Ambassador Kelrath, seated in his usual place, listened with an expression that mixed lingering discomfort with something closer to grudging respect. He had spent 3 difficult weeks defending his miscalculation to his own government, and he found himself, despite everything, genuinely curious to hear how Earth would explain itself now that the truth was fully out in the open. "I want to be clear about why we made that choice," Diane said. "It was not made out of malice, or a desire to deceive our fellow assembly members for its own sake. It was made because humanity is still a young member of this assembly, still building trust, still learning where we fit among species who have navigated the galaxy for far longer than we have. We were cautious about revealing a significant military advantage before we better understood the political landscape we were operating in. I understand that caution may look, from the outside, like deception. I don't think that's an unfair characterization, and I won't pretend otherwise." Several delegates exchanged glances at this admission. Open acknowledgement of strategic deception was rare in assembly proceedings, and the directness of it seemed to catch more than a few members off guard. "What I want you to understand," Diane continued, "is what we chose to do with that advantage once the trial forced our hand. Commander Halverson could have destroyed the Ash Crown outright the moment her ship's true capabilities were revealed. Instead, she offered Captain Drask the chance to withdraw with his ship and his crew fully intact, once the outcome of the trial had already been decided. That choice was not an accident, and it was not unique to that one engagement. It reflects a principle Fleet Command has followed consistently, long before compression-class ships like the Wren ever existed. That overwhelming strength, once demonstrated clearly enough to settle a dispute, does not need to be followed by unnecessary destruction." She looked directly at Ambassador Kelrath as she spoke her next words. "Ambassador, you challenged us because you believed our smallest ship would be an easy target. You were wrong about that, and I understand that has been difficult for you and for your government these last 3 weeks. But I want to say, clearly, in front of this entire assembly, Captain Drask conducted himself with genuine honor throughout that engagement. He pushed his ship and his crew to their absolute limit, rather than retreat prematurely, and he withdrew gracefully, under the old law, the moment the outcome was clear. That is not a small thing. Earth holds no grudge against the Vondrak Empire for this trial, Ambassador. If anything, we came away from it with respect for how your captain and your crew conducted themselves." Kelrath sat up slightly straighter at this, something in his carefully guarded expression loosening just slightly. He had expected, walking into this session, a much harsher accounting of his miscalculation. He had not expected genuine, public respect extended toward the very captain whose defeat had humiliated his government for 3 straight weeks. "So where does this leave us?" Diane asked, addressing the full chamber now. "I won't pretend humanity's larger fleet vessels don't carry similar or even more advanced compression technology than the Wren demonstrated. Some of you are already guessing at that, and you're not wrong to guess. But I want this assembly to understand something important about what that means going forward. We are not interested in using this advantage to dominate or intimidate our neighbors. We are interested in being a species other civilizations can trust to use significant strength responsibly, because trust, in the long run, builds a more stable galaxy than fear ever will." She paused, letting her final words settle over the chamber. "Praxis Vale belongs to Earth now, under the terms both sides agreed to before the trial began. We intend to develop it responsibly, and we remain open to reasonable trade and mining agreements with any species interested in working alongside us there, including the Vondrak Empire, if Ambassador Kelrath's government is interested in discussing terms once the dust from these last 3 weeks has properly settled." A long moment passed before Kelrath finally rose from his seat, 4 eyes fixed on the human ambassador standing at the center of the chamber. The room grew quiet, waiting to see how he would respond. "Ambassador Okafor," he said slowly, choosing his words with obvious care, I issued this challenge believing I understood exactly what I was asking for. I was wrong, and that mistake has cost my government significant standing within this assembly these last 3 weeks. I will not pretend that has been an easy thing to accept." He paused, glancing briefly toward where the observer footage of the trial had been replayed so many times over the past weeks that most delegates in the chamber could likely recite the key moments from memory. "But I have also watched that footage more times than I care to admit," Kelrath continued, "and I have thought carefully about what I saw. Your Commander Halverson held complete advantage over my Captain Drask and chose not to use it beyond what the trial required. That choice has stayed with me, Ambassador, more than the loss of Praxis Vale itself. On behalf of the Vondrak Empire, I would be interested in discussing trade terms for Praxis Vale, once appropriate arrangements can be formalized. And I would ask that Captain Drask's conduct during the trial be formally recognized, both by your government and by mine, as an example of honorable service, regardless of the engagement's outcome." Diane Okafor allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "I think that can be arranged, Ambassador. I think Captain Drask would appreciate that, and so would Commander Halvorson." Far from the assembly chamber, aboard the HMS Wren, now back on routine patrol near the Kessler Drift where its long, quiet mission had first begun months earlier, Commander Alexis Halvorson sat in her chair, reading the transcript of the assembly session on her data slate, a small smile crossing her face as she reached the exchange between Diane Okafor and Ambassador Kelrath. Ensign Daniel Park, no longer quite so young in his bearing after everything the crew had experienced together over the past several weeks, leaned over to read the transcript alongside her. "Looks like the ambassador came around eventually," he said. "Give people enough time and enough honesty," Alexis said, "and most of them eventually do." Chief Petty Officer Idris Osei, seated at the helm as always, glanced back with a familiar quiet smile. "So, Commander, now that the whole galaxy knows what compression-class ships are really capable of, does that mean the Wren gets a little less boring from here on out?" Alexis considered the question for a moment, looking around at her bridge, at the crew who had spent 5 years living inside a secret they had only recently fully understood, who had held steady through 7 of the most consequential minutes in recent galactic history, without a single voice raised in panic. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it just means the next time someone underestimates a small human ship, they'll think twice before challenging it. Either way, I think we've earned a little quiet, don't you?" The crew laughed softly at that, the tension of the last several weeks finally beginning to properly ease. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their slow, familiar drift, and the small gray shape of the Wren, still small to any sensor that only measured its hull, still carrying its enormous, patient strength quietly folded within, continued on its course through the dark, exactly as it always had, ready for whatever came next. Word of the trial spread across the galaxy for months afterward, retold in a dozen languages, studied by a dozen governments trying to understand what it truly meant for a young, still developing species like humanity to have quietly built something so far beyond what anyone had expected. Some species grew more cautious around Earth, others grew more curious, more interested in cooperation than confrontation, having watched firsthand what happened when overwhelming strength was paired with genuine restraint. But for the 22 people who had actually lived through those 7 long minutes aboard the Wren, the lesson that stayed with them longest was simpler than any of the galaxy's complicated political calculations. It was the lesson Commander Halvorson had tried to teach her crew from the very beginning, back when the briefing about their ship's true nature had first left them stunned and uncertain in that cramped cargo bay. Size was never really the measure of strength. It never had been. What mattered, in the end, was what a person, or a ship, or a species, chose to do with the strength they carried, and whether, when the moment finally came to reveal it, they chose to use that strength wisely. The HMS Wren continued its patrol along the Kessler Drift, small and quiet and unassuming to any casual observer, carrying its enormous secret and its steady, patient crew onward into whatever the galaxy had waiting for them next. Back on New Bristol, in the same underground facility where Vice Admiral Reyes had first briefed his engineers about the terms of Kelrath's challenge, a very different kind of meeting was now taking place. Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran stood before a much larger audience than before, representatives from Fleet Command's Strategic Planning Division, diplomatic liaisons, and several senior officers who rarely left their posts for anything less than a matter of significant importance. The trial has changed the calculus considerably, Reyes said, addressing the room. Every major species in the assembly now knows folded space compression exists. We can no longer rely on the element of surprise, the way we have for the last 5 years. The question in front of us now is simple. What do we do next? Priya activated a display showing the current state of human compression technology research, along with projections for how quickly other species might begin developing their own versions once they understood the basic principles involved. Realistically, she said, most species are years away from replicating what we've built, even with the knowledge that it's possible. Folded space compression required breakthroughs in 3 separate fields that don't typically overlap: quantum spatial theory, high-density power generation, and materials science, stable enough to survive repeated folding and unfolding cycles. Knowing the destination doesn't mean anyone else has a map to get there quickly. That buys us time, Reyes said, but not forever. We should assume that within a decade, at least 1 or 2 of the more advanced species in the assembly will have made meaningful progress toward their own compression technology. The real question is what kind of galaxy we want to be operating in once that happens. A diplomatic liaison near the back of the room raised a hand. Ambassador Okafor's approach in the assembly chamber seemed to suggest we're leaning toward transparency and cooperation, rather than continued secrecy. Is that the direction Fleet Command intends to formally pursue? Reyes nodded slowly. It is. The trial gave us an opportunity we didn't fully anticipate when this program began 5 years ago. We went in expecting, eventually, to need to reveal this technology defensively, probably during an actual military conflict, under far worse circumstances than a formal assembly trial over a mining dispute. Instead, we got to reveal it on our own terms, with a clear, controlled demonstration that ended in restraint rather than destruction. That outcome did more for Earth's standing in this assembly than another 5 years of quiet secrecy ever could have. Priya nodded in agreement. The response from species like the Feri has honestly surprised even our diplomatic corps. Public acknowledgement of respect from them is almost unheard of. If we can consistently show that overwhelming strength paired with genuine restraint is simply how humanity operates, rather than a one-time performance for a single high-profile trial, I think we have a real opportunity to reshape how the rest of the galaxy sees us. And if some species decide our new capabilities make us a threat worth countering, rather than a partner worth trusting, the liaison asked. Reyes considered this seriously before answering. Then we'll deal with that when it happens, the same way Commander Halverson dealt with Captain Drask 3 weeks ago, with strength held carefully in reserve, and restraint used deliberately, right up until restraint is no longer the wisest choice available. But I don't think that's the most likely outcome here. I think most species in this galaxy have spent generations assuming that strength and cruelty go together, that the powerful use their power simply because they can. What the Wren proved, in front of the whole assembly, is that we don't have to accept that assumption. I think that's a lesson a lot of species are still trying to process, and I think, given time, it will serve us far better than any secret ever could. Months later, the mining outposts at Praxis Vale were operating under a new joint agreement between Earth and the Vondrak Empire, negotiated carefully in the weeks following Ambassador Kelrath's public acknowledgement before the assembly. It was not a perfect arrangement, and there remained plenty of old tension beneath the surface of the new cooperation. But it held, month after month, in a way that surprised diplomats on both sides who had expected old rivalries to reassert themselves quickly. Captain Torvin Drask, still in command of the repaired Ash Crown, found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, exchanging occasional messages with Commander Halverson over the following months. Brief, professional communications at first, discussing coordination around the shared mining routes near Praxis Vale, but gradually shifting into something closer to genuine mutual respect between 2 officers who had faced each other honestly, once, under the old law, and come away from it with something better than either side had expected to find. I still don't fully understand how your ship generated that much power from a hull so small, Drask wrote to her once, several months after the trial. My own engineers have studied the footage extensively and remain baffled. Some secrets take longer than others to fully explain, Alexis wrote back. But I promise you, Captain, it wasn't magic, just patience, and 5 years of very careful, very quiet work, by people who believed it would eventually matter. Patience, Drask replied, seems to be something your species has more of than the rest of the galaxy gave you credit for. I intend to remember that going forward, Commander. It would be foolish not to. The story of the small human ship that had revealed its true size in front of the entire assembly continued to travel across known space long after the immediate excitement of the trial had faded into history. It was retold in academy classrooms, teaching new officers about the dangers of underestimating an opponent. It was studied by diplomats, trying to understand the delicate balance between strength and restraint in a galaxy still adjusting to humanity's growing presence among its ranks. And it was remembered, quietly and personally, by the 22 crew members of the HMS Wren, who had lived through those 7 long minutes together and carried the experience with them for the rest of their careers, wherever the galaxy eventually took them. Commander Alexis Halverson remained in command of the Wren for 3 more years after the trial, continuing the same quiet, patient patrols along the Kessler Drift and beyond, her small ship still carrying its enormous, carefully folded strength wherever duty required, ready, if the moment ever came again, to reveal exactly how much a species could accomplish when it chose to build strength slowly, quietly, and with genuine wisdom about how that strength should ultimately be used. And across the wider galaxy, whenever some ambitious young officer from some proud, powerful species considered underestimating a small human ship simply because of how it appeared on their sensors, there was, from that day forward, always someone nearby to remind them of what had once happened at the Veil Marker system, the day Earth's smallest battleship revealed its true size, and taught the galaxy that size, in the end, was never really the point at all.